So when we take a look at the list of new elements, you'll notice that some elements seem to do more than others. In other words, you'd probably expect the video element to exhibit more behavior than, say, the header element. But the header element does help to give the page richer semantic meaning to the page. The notion of semantic meaning to HTML documents really comes to life with the new tags available, because now instead of just wrapping anything up in a div on the page, you may have elements that better represent the meaning and purpose of the content by choosing elements that have a better semantic meaning to them, which are now found within HTML5. So let's take a quick tour through each one of these elements so that you have a basic understanding of how you might use them in the real world. The purpose of the article element is to be a container for a self-contained set of content in a document. The easy way to think about this is like a forum post, or a magazine article, or a blog post. Many pages will only feature one article per page, but that's not a requirement. An article is just a logical separator for a large group of content on the page. Now, if you have an element that gives semantic meaning to an article, then we also have to have the aside tag. So think of it this way. If you're looking at a printed magazine, often the content includes like pull quotes or other ancillary information available that's associated with the meat of the content. And often it's presented on the side of the page or sandwiched in the middle of different paragraphs. This type of content is related, but it's not of a primary importance to the message of the content. The aside tag places that same type of general significance to content placed inside this element. In the code example that I'll show you later, you'll see how I use the aside element to contain contact information for a guest on my podcast. This is just one way that you can use the element. Next are the audio and video controls with their associated source and track elements. HTML5 now has the ability to play media native in the browser. What's nice about using these controls is that the API for interacting with both audio and video is exactly the same. So once you know the media API, you can control both audio and video elements. As you'll notice in the code snippet that the source element is declared multiple times inside the video element in order to provide access to media encoded under different types. Now, you'll learn more about why you need to do this in the upcoming module on HTML5 media. There's also a track element available, which gives you the opportunity to provide subtitles to your media, and that also works both for audio and video. The BDI element allows the browser to correctly interpret bi-directional text. So if you have text that surrounds this element that needs to be going from left to right, but some of the text within that context needs to be displayed from right to left, the BDI element will help make that happen. The canvas element is a native drawing surface available within the browser. Canvas is the marriage of the new canvas element and an associated JavaScript API. As you use the canvas, you can declare what type of context you want to use as well. You can choose from 2D and WebGL, which is a 3D context. Now, this is a pixel-based or raster context, so it's not a vector environment. So drawing is done on the canvas on a pixel-by-pixel basis as supported by a grid matrix. And you'll get a chance to work with Canvas directly, as that's the topic of one of the upcoming modules here within this course. The data list is a new addition to the collection of the form elements. As the code snippet suggests, consider a form where you're giving the user an opportunity to enter their favorite color. While you want the text box to be open and available for users to enter any value that they want, you also may want to provide a suggestion list. And you can do that with an associated data list. You'll see the data list in action in the next module, where you'll learn all about the new form elements and the form API found in HTML5. How many times have you coded up an area on the page which shows some summary information or perhaps a title, and when someone clicks on that text, you expose some more information below it or to the side? Sure, it's a trivial task to be done in JavaScript or jQuery, but now you have the same behavior available via elements directly within HTML. Again, I'll show you a working example of these elements working together in just a little bit. The embed element is a new tag that's supposed to be used in favor of the object element in order to embed rich media like Flash, Silverlight, or even video content. The figure and fig caption elements provide a way to associate caption information with figures in an HTML document. Now, you may first think of using these elements with just images, and of course that's appropriate, but you can also include pre-elements for, say, marking up source code listings within a blog post. Now we've arrived at header and footer. You might not think that such humble elements would be the focus of major controversy, but in the beginning that was the case. These elements created a stir as they were first being developed because the meaning of header or footer implied placement or somehow some styling content within the HTML document. And often people didn't want to have information about where something might be placed or how it might look within the semantic meaning or the structure of HTML. The idea is that the elements themselves should have no opinion about how they're styled. What if all of a sudden you decide that you want that footer information to show up on the side of the page, or vice versa? Well, I don't know about you, but just about every web page that I've ever been to has had a header and most likely a footer. And beyond that, the elements that we're discussing here are relevant to the logical container. So that means you could very well have an HTML document with a header and the footer as the child of an article element. And then you could have other containers that have headers and footers inside of them. So the header and footer element can work as the header and footer to the layout of your page. But specifically, it's talking about header and footer of the logical container within an HTML document. The main element is still considered experimental, but the idea behind main is that it's the page's main content. This element should not be a child of article or aside or header or footer or nav. It's the main content of the page, and being that, there should be only one instance of it on any given page. Well, this is a fairly recent addition to HTML5, so like I said, it's still considered experimental at this point. Remember the first time you saw the equation for standard deviation? I do. It looked like a foreign language to me. The math element gives you a place to use the math ML markup language in order to natively represent mathematical equations, rather than having to always rely on images in order to represent those equations. The mark element is used to mark, or often highlight or bold, text within text. A typical use of mark might be making the search terms stand out in the context of search results. Now, different browsers have different defaults on how marked text will look, but you can override those settings in the style sheet, and I'll demonstrate to you how this works in a coming example. The meter element, which is often rendered as a bar graph, has its purpose to depict a value within a known range of values. The bar shown in the example below the code is how the meter element renders in Chrome. The nav element is another one of those elements that brings specific meaning to something that's found on just about every website created. Navigation links are at the heart of websites, and the nav element is used to add semantic meaning to the links that are considered the main navigation links around the site itself. In other words, you would place the links to the home, about us, and contact pages inside the nav element. So these are only links within pages within the website. If you have links to third-party resources or other links off your site, then you wouldn't use the nav element for this purpose. Again, nav is the container for the main navigation links of the host website. Often you'll find the typical unordered list of links styled to look like navigation links or buttons within this element. While you want to keep context-specific links within the nav element, you're not restricted on how many occurrences are allowed on a page. For instance, many developers will have a nav element in the header of the page, as well as the footer. The output element is used to provide a place to output the results of a calculation. The progress element is a native tag that renders a progress bar. Now you can't see in the screenshot shown here, but the progress area, or the green area, is animated in the browser, giving the user idea that interaction is happening within the background. The section element is one that can be a bit confusing at first. After all, we have a div and a span elements for a long time. And now we have main, an article, and aside. So what's the purpose of a section? Well, the section element is used to create a logical container around a set of elements, often without regard for how it will be styled on the screen. So while practically there's virtually no difference between a section or div element. In fact, the purpose of both of these elements is to create groups among elements. But the rule of thumb to use is that section elements are best used when you want to make an association but you don't have any styling needs. And you use divs when grouping is done with the purpose of making the elements look somehow different on the screen. Again, being a logical container, there's no restrictions on using a section. You can open up a section element and place in an article element inside it, and then turn around and add another section inside the article. And it's the same for divs and so on. The time element is really more than just time, but rather think of it as a point in time, which includes year, month, day, minute, second, and even a time zone offset. The pubdate attribute on the element is available for you to mark specifically the published date of a document. So if you use pubdate, there can be one and only one time element on the page, which includes the pubdate attribute. Otherwise, the time element is used to represent any other point in time. Finally, the WBR element is the word break element. This element is used to assign the point in which to break a word if wrapping becomes necessary. So this element can come in handy if your site features technical, legal, or even medical jargon and you want it to appear the right way on the screen. So if the text needs to wrap on the screen, the browser knows how to break up that word in order to make the wrap work appropriately. Now let's take a moment and take a look at that list of elements again. Now I'll gray out some of the names, and the remaining elements I'll use in a demo coming up within this module so you can see how they're used in context of a real HTML page. Some of the other elements like canvas, data list, and video are covered in more detail in subsequent modules within this course. Well, now that you're acquainted with most of the new elements found in HTML5, the next section will review a number of the new JavaScript APIs that accompany HTML5 as well.